Okay. Start today first year on העזר, Yuchsin. First few Siman was Hilchos issues, it's connected to Hilchos Yuchsin. We will be discussing the first topic I want to talk about is in the end of Siman Aleph in העזר, which is what you learned this past week. And that is as follows. If you look at the Tur in Siftes, Shulchan Aruch in Siftes says, a person is allowed to marry a few wives, even as long as he's able to financially support them. A person has obligations under the Ksubah to support his wife. And as long as he's able to support them, he is able to marry them. Right away, the Tur adds, "V'moka in Sif Yud, v'mokim sheshtakone, v'ztakone, not to marry, and you can only marry one wife." Then we follow the minhag. What's this takane? The Beis Yosef over there right away mentions to you what this takane is. It's takane of Rabbeinu Gershom. It's called Chedem de Rabbeinu Gershom. That he mentions, first of all, that in the Yevamah there's no such chedem. That means if a person is already married and then his brother's wife passes away, his brother passes away without any kids, and his wife is now going to be a second wife because of a Yevamah, there's no chedem. That is what the Nemuki Yosef says in the name of the Ritva. And he brings from the Rashba, it's not clear which Rashba is referring to, that in general the Takana of Rabbeinu Gershom did not apply in Mokim Mitzvah, in places Mokim Mitzvah, or not in Mokim Mitzvah, in the Mokim Shechayev Lagarish, in a situation when the man is obligated to give a get to his wife. There's certain scenarios which are going to be learned later in Shulchan Aruch, that, I don't know if you can learn it this year, but it's there in the העזר, in certain scenarios when a woman does certain things and therefore she is obligated to accept a get. Or scenarios, for example, when, this is also mentioned over there, if a woman is married if a couple is married for 10 years and they don't have any kids, in such a scenario, he is obligated to divorce her. We don't do that today, but it's already written why we don't do it. In such scenarios, there's no chedem of Rabbeinu Gershom. Chedem of Rabbeinu Gershom, what is it? It's two elements. Now, it's not exactly clear what were the charamas of Rabbeinu Gershom. There's somewhere it mentions that there's 10 of them. There's records of 6 of them, and these two are the most famous ones, which is, first of all, not to marry another wife, a second wife, and the other one is not to force a woman to receive a get. Both of these things, al pi Torah, are mutter. A woman does not have to give her free will to receive a get. A husband can throw a get to her reshus, and she's megurish, could put it in her hand, and she's megurish. As long as her part, as long as it's fulfilled according to Torah, the get only has a few conditions. It has to be l'shmai v'l'shma, l'shem gerushin, has to be written by him or his appointed person. It has to be given to her hands completely, and that is a get krisus. So, but Rabbeinu Gershom was geizer not to divorce a woman be'al korcho, and not to take another wife. What's the reason for it? It could either be traced to the fact that the people were not able to afford having 2 wives, or it was that the woman should have somewhat of equal rights in marriage, and this was done by Rabbeinu Gershom. Now, Rabbeinu Gershom passed away 996 years ago, almost 1,000 years ago. In the year Daled Tafshin Pei Ches. In other words, Hey Tafshin Pei Gimel. This is when he passed away. Then he made a takana beforehand. The Beis Yosef adds this takana did not spread out in the countries where not everybody accepted this takana. In the countries where the Beis Yosef lived, it was not accepted. And he also brings another interesting point, the Marik brings, that the takana of Rabbeinu Gershom expired at the end of Elef HaChamishi. And the Elef HaChamishi means another 112 years after he passed away. So the whole takana was only for about 130, 140 years. However, this whole the chedem was until then. That's what the Marik mentions. However, this takana was continued as a minhag, and we still follow it. The Darkei Moshe right away points out to you over there that even though the Beis Yosef says that because it's not a chedem anymore, we're not koife in such a scenario. If a man marries a second woman, we do not force him to divorce his second wife. Still no, the Darkei Moshe brings the opinions which say that we are, even today, that it's after the takana is over, the chedem is over and still takana, we're still koife. The only thing is, he says, our opinions which hold you don't need 100 rabbis. Because originally, one of the conditions for Hetem Rabbanim one of the conditions for Chedem Rabbeinu Gershom was that to be able to avoid it, you need 100 Rabbanim to sign it. But the takana is over. Some opinions say you don't need 100 Rabbanim. It's no longer a gzeira. It's only a minhag. Yeah, but we're going to see later that even today we do the Mei Rabbanim. Now, the point that the Beis Yosef mentions that in the Yevamah, Rabbeinu Gershom was not geyser, because, and the logic behind it is because the Mokim Mitzvah, Rabbeinu Gershom was not geyser. So he says, yeah, that's the shit of the Ritva. But the Agois Mordechai holds that even by a Yibum, we are still Chedem Rabbeinu Gershom, and we are koife the man to do chalitza. He can't do yibum to his sister-in-law, who's now going to become his second wife because of Chedem Rabbeinu Gershom. The Darkei Moshe does bring the opinions that in Mokim Mitzvah Rabbeinu Gershom was not geyser. For example, if they were 10 years married and there's no kids, what's the Mokim Mitzvah over there is he has to have Piri V'Rivya, and if he's going to stay, that's the reason he has to divorce her. Such a scenario, there's no Chedem Rabbeinu Gershom. If she refuses to take a get, to Megarish Bal Korcha or marry a second woman. But he says at the same time, with certain opinions, the Mari Mintz, paskend even by a Yevameh, that there is a Chedem Rabbeinu Gershom, and which means even b'mokim mitzvahs also Rabbeinu Gershom was still geyser even b'mokim mitzvah. And he concludes with the words of the Kolboi that you need 100 rabbis, and the 100 rabbis have to come from three kehilas in 3 countries, and he gives examples what these places are. He says Aragon, which is in Spain, and he mentions France, and he mentions Lombardy, which is Italy. Each one of them was its own kingdom at the time. 3 kilos with the different countries. And you could only be matir if you have a tam mevurer, a very clear reason to be matir. And another point, the minig is a minig unless you have a raya farkert. That means, if you have any place where you don't know whether there's a minig or not, the minig stands. The only places where there is no minig is in places where you know that the minig was not accepted. And that is in the Sfadisha countries where it was not accepted. Today, when they came to Eretz Yisrael, the Rabbanut did impose that it should be accepted. So the Sfadim cannot marry a second wife in Eretz Yisrael. But there is a grandfather clause that if they come with more than one wife from their country of origin, they can still keep the second wife, they don't have to divorce her. Yeah, and then the Beis Yosef, we'll go back to the Beis Yosef. Beis Yosef concludes over there another interesting point, which is not directly connected to Chedem Rabbeinu Gershom. If a person was married to a woman and she shmatzich, she became a mumeres, then in Austria the minhag was that you mezakeh a get al yidei zikui. And in Germany, the minhag was that he marries another woman without giving a get. He points out these 2 things. What's a get al yidei zikui? When we know that a get for a woman is not a schus, you could do zachan adam shlei b'fanav, but a get is not a schus, and there's a Gemara we all learned that tav l'meitav, it's better to have somebody, even if the guy is a disaster, than to live alone. Therefore, the Gemara does not consider a get as a schus for a woman. But in this scenario, when she's a mumeres, we do consider it a schus for her according to those opinions, because she's definitely, now that she's shmatzich, she's definitely going to be living be'isur with a goy or whatever it is, and therefore, by mizake get to her, you're doing a schus. How does this get zikui work? Even though it's not really connected to this, I'm just mentioning it with derech hagav. The husband gives it to somebody, and he says, "Chei beged for this woman." The person is zoiche for the woman by picking up the get, and at that moment the woman becomes divorced. Whether she could get remarried without actually picking up a get is a whole different long discussion. In Pesachim, if she does tshuva, does she marry somebody else without a get? The answer is no, she has to come pick up the get. Or get a new get. But if she does marry if she ends up doing tshuva, marrying a yid, without picking up a get by receiving the get in her hands, there's enough opinions that say that she is mutter, the kids are not mamzerim. Now, the mechaber, so I'm giving you basic general introduction of the concepts, because you did learn them, but this is probably not everybody here was introduced to the concepts in the past. In the past years I did mention certain details of it, but now we're actually learning it. So I'm giving you a general background of everything that's relevant to this case. All the dinim are relevant to it. Yeah, the mechaber brings this din of chen Rabbeinu Gershom in Seif Yud. He mentions that Rabbeinu Gershom did not make the cherem in a yevameh. They have a long Ramah split into two parts in Seif Yud, where he brings all the opinions. He starts by bringing the machlekes, whether if in b'makim mitzvah Rabbeinu Gershom was geyser or was not geyser. He brings the first opinions that b'makim mitzvah Rabbeinu Gershom was not geyser. For example, the example of 10 years without having any kids. And that is the opinion of the Mordechai and the Rashba and the Maran Padva. And the people disagree and say even Makim Mitzvah Rabbeinu Gershom was Goyzer, and that is the opinion of the Goyz Mordechai and the Nimukei Yosef. Now, what happens if it's not Makim Mitzvah, but she's not Bas Gerush, and she's unable to receive a get? Because for a get to happen, the husband has to be in his capacities, and the woman also has to be in her capacities. It can't be that one of them is a shaita. Whatever the definition, the halachic definition of it is, again, not for the discussion right now, just might touch upon it a little bit, but it's not, the idea is if a woman's nishtatis, she cannot receive a get, so what is he going to do now? Is he chayiv l'garesh, can't be megarish her. What is he going to do? He can't live with her, nishtatis, ganze meshuga. So, in such a scenario, that's the Ramah says nishtatis or chayiv l'garesh, and she's not interested in taking a get. In such a scenario, he could be mekel to her to marry another woman. It's interesting to point out, and this is what's going to be discussed in Pesach Tshuva, that Ramah combines these two together, nishtatis and chayiv l'garesh, and he does not mention the 100 rabbis in this point over here. And he says, and in these countries, the takana of Rabbeinu Gershom still exists, and we're koifin, cherem, and a nidui, anybody who violates the cherem of Rabbeinu Gershom, and he has to divorce his wife. And even though Yeshayim that we're not koifin b'zman hazeh, we're still ein noegim, like the people say, ein koifin, rather, we still are koifin the man to divorce the second wife. And he concludes also, if somebody was the shmadzich, then they do a get zikui to her. Huh?
Also by nishtatis you do zikui.
No, you don't do zikui by nishtatis. You can't do zikui by nishtatis. You can't do zikui. You can't do zikui, you can't do get bal korach. The only thing you can do is say shalishte by nishtatis. If she can't accept the get with her own hands, she can't accept the get with zikui either. Now, the Bach on the Tur brings the Ramah in Shulchan Aruch, that if she is unable to accept a get, for example, nishtatis, or he's obligated to give her a get, but she's not interested in taking a get, it could be mekel. And the Bach adds, you still need Rabbanim. Not only that, you also have to be mashlish the ksuba. You have to deposit in Bezdin the amount that she is entitled to in her ksuba. Now, if she is in a situation where she's itim cholam, itim shaita, that she is in her capacities and sometimes she's not, in such a scenario, you cannot give her a get and be mashlish ksuba. The only thing you can do, even though she's itim cholam, the only thing you can do is to lisa isha alishtay. And the Bach does seem to take the opinion that the mokim mitzvah Rabbeinu Gershom was not goizer, and in every scenario you have the mitzvah of lo letayu bero lo sheves yitzara, mitzvah of piri v'rivya. And he obviously brings the opinions which hold that by Yevameh Rabbeinu Gershom was not goizer, and from that is a raya that in mokim mitzvah there's no gzeir of Rabbeinu Gershom. And he concludes what he mentions, that in general the way it should work is that every place where any situation where there's a need to be matir for a person to marry a second wife, they should do proper research, and then 100 rabbis, and that's the minhag of our rabbis. Yeah, that's the Bach says. The Bishmul points out what I pointed out to you before. That's where I got it from. That the Ramah puts both together, puts nishtatis and chayav l'garish and eretz l'garish, and he says it seems from the Ramah that he does not require 100 rabbis. He puts them both together, nishtatis and that she's chayav l'garish, and both of them there's no takone b'chlal of Rabbeinu Gershom. Still in all, being that the Bach says that you have to present the case to Gdei Adoir, and you have to get 100 rabbis, and you have to be mashlish l'ksuba, that's what should be done. He adds another point. In addition to be mashlish l'ksuba, you also have to write a get and give it to a shliach l'hoilache, to give it to the woman when she recovers, if she's a shaita, or when she decides to accept a get, if she's chayav l'garish. Not only that, he also has to take care of her expenses. She's still his wife. He's marrying a second wife. He's not divorcing her. He is marrying a second wife. It means his obligations are not expired yet. He still has to take care of her expenses, of her needs. He has to even get her own place to live, because the liyachid labayis, that she could stay, she's not going to be on the streets. If she's a shaita, she's going to might end up doing things that are improper, and it's also for her because she's still married. Therefore, you have to still take care of her needs. Now, once she's going to recover, and now back to Cher, now you have two women who are not crazy, so Chen Rabbeinu Gershom kicks back in. You can't live with both, so you have to divorce one. You divorce the first one that you do. You divorce the first one. There's a bunch of Pischei Teshuvos from Seif Katan Yudalid through Seif Katan Chaf or Chaf Aleph. Like it's about 2 pages of long bunch of Pischei Teshuvos. Bring a bunch of them. I'm just going to mention a few of the interesting ones that are there, which are all relevant to what it is. The first in Seif Katan Yudalid, it brings a story of a person a woman left her husband, and she went and got some sugar. She disappeared. Nobody knows what happened to her. And this brings from a tshuva Neder B'Yehuda, that being that in a regular standard case of nishtatis, the Ramah is mekel, and says that Rabbeinu Gershom was not geyser. So even though standard case of nishtatas, the only time we're makel is when we have the woman in front of us in Bezdin and we're able to see that she's taking nishtatas, still in all, in this scenario when she disappeared and she was crazy beforehand, we don't need that. Rather, we have the idea of nishtatas, plus we have a suffix, maybe she's bichlal dead. In such a scenario, you could be makel for him to marry a second wife. As long as he doesn't require 100 rabbis. This is the son of Noda B'Yehuda, Tshuva and Noda B'Yehuda. He says as long as two other rabbanim are maskim with me. That's Noda B'Yehuda. Pischat Tshuva Sivkot and Tazayin, he brings from the Shev Yaakov, who he discusses what the Beis Shmuel mentions, that the Ramah combined the two together and therefore made them into one package. So he says that doesn't apply in every scenario when chayav l'garish. He's talking about these cases, he's talking about when it's chayav l'garish, but she didn't do anything wrong. Because later on in Hilchas Gittin, maybe we'll get to it one of these days, there's a dinim of that if chayav l'garish because she did something wrong. If a woman is mizan and it's proven she's yoitzi, she has to get divorced. Averes al das, if she's certain scenarios also yoitzi, she loses eksuba, she doesn't lose eksuba. She's a meiredes, she's refusing to be with her husband, also she's obligated to take a get. Those are scenarios where she did something to merit this idea of being an obligated get. But these scenarios that Ramah mentions, he specifically over here, he does not mention. He combines, he gives you the example of Shas Hashanah. Means we're talking about Chayav L'Garesh, but only in scenarios where it was not based on her fault. And in these scenarios, it's clear that she needs 100 rabbis. He needs 100 rabbis to marry a second wife. He can't just, or to divorce a Baal Korcha in such a scenario. And that's why also over here there's a machlekes, if makom mitzvah, not makom mitzvah, the two shittas. But if she's pleishas, if she did something wrong to be able to get that punishment on her, then over there, this is mentioned later on in Shulchan Aruch, and the Ramah clearly writes it's no chayim derben gershom, without any distinction. And over there, the Ramah does not mention there's a machlekes makom mitzvah or not. Over there, it's clear. She's a peshas, but there's no chayim derben gershom. There were more mekel than over here. Why is that? He points out to you a very important point. This is also going to be discussed. This whole thing is an introduction to the Tzemach Tzedek, by the way. That's why I gave you Tzemach Tzedek today. That there is that L'Garish Baal Korcha, a heter meir rabbanim, L'Garish Baal Korcha is easier than Lisa Yishal Ishtoi. And in Averes al Das, it's better to be Megarish Baal Korcha. But the Pischat Tshuva adds on to it and says all this is only according to Beis Shmuel. That from him it's mashma that you don't have to be machmer in Averes al Das to require meir rabbanim. Yeah, but there are opinions which even in such a scenario would require meir rabbanim. And then he mentions another idea from another tshuva that if they were married for 10 years and they didn't have any kids, and then the husband wants to move to Eretz Yisrael and she doesn't want to move to Eretz Yisrael, the two things combined together, also Yigarish Baal Korcha, and even more, he doesn't have to give her a ksuba. Now, who are these 100 rabbis? The Pischat Tshuva over there mentions, there's a discussion. Does it also include, who are they? So the first thing he says, it can't be that they're all Meireh Hira, because it says Gimel Kehilas. Gimel Mekilas, Gimel Medinas. It's not shaykh to have 100 Meireh Hira in 3 communities. It's obviously talking about people who are Talmidei Chachamim, who are Re'uyim Le'ira. Because the discussion starts with the Bachrim who are Bachurim Muflagim are shaykh to be part of this 100 rabbis or not. And these Mashma Pischat Tshuva does not agree with the Bachurim Muflagim should do, but anybody who is Re'uy Le'ira is able to sign on this. And that's how you get to the three rabbis, to the 100 rabbis from 3 different places. Now he brings another place. What happens if you have 3 countries which were then conquered by one Kesar? one king, do they lose the status of 3 countries? He says no. He gives examples of 3 countries. Now, today we know about this. You can have a city that some weeks is under one country is a Shiloh. It still counts as a different country, even though it's conquered by a new kingdom. So, if we talk politics, Russia, Ukraine, it could be 2 separate countries even today, even though parts of it are still conquered. David, you're asking me, you're not allowed to talk on camera. Russia and Ukraine are considered 2 countries today, even if they're conquered by one?
We're waiting for the latest developments.
Okay. Now, we mentioned in the Nekuda that you have to be mashlish a get. You have to be mashlish, give a get to shliach leilocha, that she should pick it up when she is able to do it. He brings he brings certain opinions that it doesn't work b'chlal. Why? You can't, a shliach, you could only appoint to do something that you yourself can do right now. A husband can't give a get to her now. What is he appointing a shliach to? The get might b'chlal not be worth anything. It seems that when she does become better, he would have to write a new get and give to her. It says, and that's why you'll see later in Tzemach Tzedek how exactly this is done. But just to give a get when she's a shaita, it doesn't seem like it doesn't work. And if he brings to Neder Behuda, if she's not completely nuts, she's just not fully in her capacities, she's still able to be with him as husband and wife. That's not enough to be matir him to marry a second wife. But what is considered a shaita? He brings some tshuva from Ksav Yad. He says that the definition of a shaita is not specifically the definitions that are written in Shulchan Aruch. That's written in Gemara. But kafir ha'isena dayanim, they'll look to see if a person is acting nuts. That person is considered nuts. Now, and then in Sifkot and Chaf, he mentions a few poskim. He brings a few poskim. Pesach brings a few poskim that you don't have to. Even though the Ramos says that koif from the garish when you marry a second woman, in such a scenario you don't have to be. A lot of people say you ain't koifin. She doesn't have to. You're not koifin to divorce a second wife and marry a second wife. That is a summary of Sif Yud, Sayin Tur B'S Yosef with the Neisei Kelim and Mechaber Ramah and the Neisei Kelim. I gave you today Tzemach Tzedeks, a packet of Tzemach Tzedeks. Now I know you didn't learn them yet, so this is going to be a summary introduction of where you should be able to find them. These are, I think, all the tshuvas of Tzemach Tzedek regarding Chelim, almost all of them regarding Chelim Rabbeinu Gershom. It opens up with this topic because it's the first Siman in Shulchan Aruch. And so the first Siman in Tzemach Tzedek, Siman Aleph, and Siman Beis are the same story. There was a woman who was nishtatis, 1.5 years, 18 months. She was not in her capacities. And the husband wants to move on with life. The relatives of the woman, seems like, from this tshuva to the next tshuva, they're not willing that he should get a heter me'erabanim, he should get a mafkiach chen ben gesher, marry a second wife, until it's proven in Bezdin, Zabla v'Zabla, that she is unable to be cured. The doctors should prove that she's unable to be cured. Not that she's crazy now, that we know. That she's hopelessly ill, and she'll never be able to be cured. And there's also a discussion if he has to, should pay ksuba. This guy is saying, I got to move on with life. I don't have money to be mashal sheksuba. So the first thing that Tzemach Tzedek points out in Sif Aleph, in Siman Aleph he brings a few points. First of all, this idea of being mashal sheksuba is only if he's able to afford it. If he's not able to afford it, he brings from his uncle, great uncle, the Sheres Yehuda. He says, "Shehetir bazel ma'ase v'lo chiva rak b'mezainis." All he has to do is continue paying her regular support; she should be able to live. But he does not have to be mashlish and bezdin the sum of a ksuba. The other point is, you don't have to wait for her you don't have to wait until it's proven that she's unable to ever be cured again. It's enough that that right now she's been shaita for enough time. That's already enough for him to marry another woman. And even though there's enough of a reason to say that Rabbeinu Gershom was not mesaken in such a scenario, he says he still needs to get a hundred rabbis in this scenario. Yeah, he says because the Bach says that chena minuk pashut, so you can't avoid getting the meir rabbanim. And the last point he points out in Siman Aleph is also this whole idea of being mashal shaget. You don't really have to do it either. It's not, and it's a contradiction. This is a short tshuva, and in later tshuvas he expands on this topic. This is Siman Aleph. Siman Beis is a hemshech to this one. He starts by bringing a concept. Now, I'll introduce to you a new concept. There's a concept. There's certain scenarios where a man is forced to give a get to his wife, not because his wife did anything wrong, but because he has a mum that is unable to live with. The Rosh says that the takana of Rabbeinu Gershom about not being megarish isha ba'al korcha, you can't say, and this is repeated in another tshuva in Tzachzedek, you can't say that Rabbeinu Gershom made a takana that the koyach of the woman should be stronger than the koyach of the man. It has to be equal. So the idea is to equalize it. So if this would be a case, that if the husband would have this defect, he would be forced to give a get. If the wife has this defect, he should have the right to be mafkiach chen Rabbeinu Gershom, give him a get, ba'al korcha. So, if the woman has a mum similar to what the husband would have, he would be forced to give a get. And such a thing, the wife is forced to receive a get. Now the Tzemach Tzedek says, the mum of nishtatis is greater than any of the mumim that the Shulchan Aruch says that the husband is forced to give a get for. And the mumim over there talking about he has falls and nichpes and nichpe and the rechoira and certain things, the mum that he has over there, that's kai from the garish. In these scenarios, he says the mum of nishtatas is much bigger than all other mumim. So if by the other mumim, the smaller mumim, we say that if he would have it, he would be forced to give a get, and if she has it, we're going to say that he's allowed to give her a get ba'al korcha, and chen Rabbeinu Gershom is invalid for sure. By nishtatas, he's able to marry a second woman, and he does not have to. And obviously, with the head to marry rabbanim, but the chen Rabbeinu Gershom doesn't apply. That's the first nekuda. Second point is, again, he repeats that you have to have 100 rabbanim. Third point that Tzemach Tzedek brings in Siman Beis, he discusses the whole. And he says, and Bichal discusses whether in such a scenario you need Bichal 100 rabbanim. This means from the middle of the second column of page Aleph through, he discusses three different ways of looking. He explains why Be'etzem, if Rabbeinu Gershom was not geyser in such a scenario, it would mean that the Bichal don't need Meir Rabbanim. However, being that the Bach already wrote that Kvanogu, that even by Nishtates you need 100 rabbis, so the lashon that Tzemach Tzedek says is Bevadei Chalila lo zuz min haminig. But the minig is nagu la'achmer. The minig was to do it. It's not that me'ikra takana you need it. Me'ikra takana there's no chen in the Rabbeinu Gershom. In such a scenario, Mikra Takana, you don't need 100 rabbis. The minig became that you need 100 rabbis, so we'll get the 100 rabbis. Then goes the whole discussion again. This discussion, he brings the chkira of the Vashav HaKoyen, whether there is in the Mokim Mitzvah Rabbeinu Gershom was geyser, or he was not geyser, and he explains that we all know, I mentioned before, that Mari Mintz is the one that holds that the Mokim Mitzvah goes to Rabbeinu Gershom. So Machzedek brings from the Shava Kohen. That idea that Marim Min says Mokem Mitzvah L'Gazar Rabbeinu Gershom is only when he is still able to live with this woman as a husband and wife. If he's no longer able to live with her as a husband and wife, even the Marim Mins would agree that if it's also Mokem Mitzvah, there's no gzeira there's no chedem of Rabbeinu Gershom. So in the scenario of Nishtates, even according to Marim Mins, if there's a need of Mokem Mitzvah, for sure he would be matir, if it's a Mokem Mitzvah, to say that there was no chedem that Rabbeinu Gershom in such a scenario. Still a no, because he says you need 100 rabbis, fine. But now back to the other point, whether you need to prove that she is unable to, that she will never be able to recover. He says you don't need it. The fact that she's crazy for a year and a half, that's already enough of a reason that he can marry a second woman. He can marry a second woman over it. He says, and what these rabbis wrote, that he's not allowed to, the rabbis in that town wrote that he's not allowed to marry a woman until is nisbared in front of Beis Din. Shelo yo'ilu lo refuis v'shiev shelo ben das lo durima. The fact that he says that the Beis Din says that he cannot marry a second wife until there's going to be a Beis Din, which is going to prove that she is crazy in such a way that she will never be able to recover and will never be able to marry somebody else. That's not needed. That's not needed. Elamai, as long as this is a long-term sickness, she's been sick for a long time, that's already enough. And there's no suffix. He says, when are we talking about it? When she has a different kind of sickness, not when she's crazy. It's a different kind of sickness. That's when you could go into a whole discussion whether you have to wait, whether you could say maybe she's going to recover, maybe it's something that he could live with. But in such a scenario, when it's nishtatas, you don't say that. You don't say that you have to wait until the doctor proves that that she'll never recover. Rather, the fact is right now she's crazy for this amount of time, a year and a half. And maybe it's right to make him wait a little bit longer, but you can't force him to wait a little bit longer. Rather, the moment he gets the 100 Rabbanim, he could do it. But he has to be mashal sheksuba. So then we're back to the original question. In mashal sheksuba, he doesn't have money to be mashal sheksuba. So this is what he ends. In this tshuva. In this tshuva, he says that he's chayev in feeding her, he's chayev in taking care of her refuah, because that's his obligation. However, if he's unable to pay to be mashal sheksuba, he doesn't have to be mashal sheksuba. It's enough with mezainis and the refuah, which is something which was mentioned earlier. And Siman Beis. And Siman Gimel comes to the discussion about a woman which was crazy for about 6 years. That's what's mashma from later in the tshuva. And right now she's in a time when she's fine. Itim chalum, itim shaita. Right now she's chaluma. And the local Beis Din wants that she should take, she was asking to get a get. And there was a suffix, they were asking to Machzedek, because right now seems like she's fine. Could we give a get right now? We don't know what's going to happen, if she's going to lose it or not. So the Machzedek says, first of all, mitzad chen Rabbeinu Gershom, he's allowed to marry a second wife. Now, he should write the get now that she is itim cholim. However, don't give a get until you see that she is stable in this situation. She was crazy for 6 years. Suddenly she looks a little bit normal. We don't know if she's going to stay normal. So right now, to give her a get, you don't know, because maybe she's not. Maybe it's a passing fad, and she's not really able to accept the get. But it's enough It's enough to be able to say that you could give a get through a shliach. And because we mentioned before that there are those opinions that if you give a get through a shliach and the wife is not able to receive the get at this moment, that get is not really good. So in this scenario, right now, itim cholim, maybe she's able to receive the get. So give it through a shliach now, and then wait and see. If she's going to stabilize as a normal person, then you could give her a get. And it's interesting that Tzemach Tzedek writes it as a svara, and he says, the svara only applies if Tnai Kaful, if the Rav of the city of Dubravna and the Rav of Kapust will agree to it. V'im lo dvarai betelim. And then the Tzemach Tzedek goes to discussion. Is there really a valid reason now to allow him to marry a second wife? The whole reason when you're able to marry a second wife is when she's crazy. But now we see that she got better. So based on what svara could you say that he's able to just give to just marry a second woman? There's no chen in the Gershom. And he explains why he explains the svara why, because it all depends how long she was crazy for. Here she was crazy for a long enough time that it was enough to establish the heter as a valid heter, that even though right now she recovered for a little bit, that's not enough to cancel the heter that she was originally crazy. And he mentions, like I said, about that if you have that to give a get in the time when she's completely crazy is a problem, and that's why she should do the get written now when she's somewhat normal, and then wait and see what happens. These are all short shuvas. Comes as a very big Yesodus Dikashuva in Siman Vav, where Tzemach Tzedek comes with a very big chiddush that's in between the tshuva. It's a long tshuva. We're going to go through it and summarize it. It's not enough time. Siman Vav is a case when a person married a woman, she was nishtatis, 8 years, she's nishtatis, he wants to marry another woman, he wants to be mashal shaget, he's very poor, he doesn't have enough money for a ksubah, and he doesn't have enough money to be mefarnes the two women, the old one and the new one. So the first thing that Tzemach Tzedek points out is, he says this, that they imposed, that a person has, that the person when he's noise isha alishta has to be mashlish the ksuba is only when he has money. If he doesn't have money, we don't impose it. Rather, it remains as a choiv on him. That means it becomes a monetary obligation. The get is a get. The lisei shalishtai is lisei shalishtai. The get that he gives, his mashal shaget, is one thing. The chiyuv of a ksuba remains a choiv on him. It's not that you block the lisei shalishtai until he's able to afford it. Why? The very interesting lashon right in the beginning of Ois Aleph of Sifav. L'cha'ira hu milsa de mistabra. The ein svara, there's no logic. Shemishum chiyuv mamoin ye'agnu sa'ish. You're going to make the husband into agun, the male version of an aguna. She'yavatam mitzvah spiri v'rivya. V'yuchal lovei lehirhurim roim v'averes chas v'shalom. By you blocking him from marrying a second woman, what is he going to do? He can't live with his current woman because he can't afford. No, you can tell him he can't marry a second one because he can't afford it. What is he going to do? Start thinking. So there's no logic to say that in such a scenario you're going to tell a guy he can't do it. So therefore, in the first ois, this is a discussion. The first two oisias, the discussion is whether the ksuba is an independent obligation which blocks the person from being able to lisei shalish, or it's not a separate obligation. And he explains that there are certain shittas. So this the first ois that he brings is the shittas which say that the only time when the momin is separate is only when he is obligated to give her a get because of something that she did. Because something that she did. But if it's something, it's not because of her fault. Rather, it's a general, it's a different shasas or shonim or nishtatas. There are opinions which hold that you can't get married if you don't have this. You can't marry a second woman if you're not able to afford it. And that is the Rashba and the Rosh. And Ois Beis, he brings the shit of the Rivosh that it's not so. The Rivosh holds that even if he's not mechuyev, if she's not mechuyev to accept a get because of something that she do, he's still able to marry a second woman or give a get bal korcha, and the moment becomes a chayiv. And he continues this Sif Gimel, even though the Achronim pass like the Rosh and not like the Rivosh. Here comes the Tzemach Tzedek with an interesting chiddush, because Nishtatis, like we mentioned in the previous different shuvah, Nishtatis is such a big mum, bigger than the mumim, that a man, if he would have them, he would be obligated to give a get. So over here also, this may be considered like a case that he's obligated, that she is obligated to receive a get, and therefore, if he doesn't have enough money to receive a ksuba, to pay a ksuba, that becomes a chayv. Got it or not? I'm going to repeat it. I see not everybody got it. If, like this, we explained before that if you have if a man would have a certain mum, he would be obligated to divorce his wife. It's a chiyuv on him, his mum. If a woman has that mum, we explained according to the Rosh, it makes sense that he would be able to megara bal korcha, right? Now, Nishtatis is a bigger mum than the mum which are listed. So therefore, if by a smaller mum it becomes a chiyuv l'garesh, by such a bigger mum it would be even a bigger chiyuv l'garesh. The problem is that she's unable to take a get, so he has to marry a second wife. But once we moved it into the category of chiyuv l'garesh because of a mum, it's no longer in the category of shas eser shanim. It's a mum. If it's a mum, it's chayv l'garesh, even though they paskin like the Rosh, and that the shit is that when it's not her fault, he can't just say the ksuba becomes a chayv, because we converted nishtatas into a mum that becomes a chayv l'garesh, automatically that falls into the category of these kinds of gittin where the ksuba does not block the get, but rather the ksuba becomes, the obligation of ksuba becomes a independent obligation. The get is a get, or in this scenario, the lisa ishalisha is a chiyuv, is one thing, and the ksuba becomes an obligation on him. And Sif Dal and Sif Hey, the Tzemach Tzedek disagrees on the Avodas HaGershuni. The Avodas HaGershuni, the Tshuvas Avodas HaGershuni says that comes with an idea that if a person cannot afford to have a second wife, even when he's chayev to divorce the first wife, if he's unable to afford the other wife, he doesn't have to. He's bottled from. He cannot marry another one, and therefore he's bottled from piri v'rivya. Tzemach Tzedek completely says it's not shaykh, it's such a thing. He ends Sif Hey by saying on the Avodas HaGershuni this logic that for lack of money piri v'rivya is cancelled, so to speak. Tzorich yun gadol. Now, what is considered a mitzvah? Yeah, so. Shas Hashonim, yeah. Yeah, so he says, and a sif in Ois Vav, the Tzemach Tzedek continues explaining why it makes and he explains why even according to Avodas HaGershuni it should be fine. Now, after all this, Tzemach Tzedek says, Kol zeh, Dina de Gemara. But now that we have Chenim D'Rabbeinu Gershom, comes the shaila, could you marry another woman? It's not giving her a get, giving to get the first. Could you marry another woman if you're unable to afford to keep two women? And he brings over here an Oizayin from the Tzemach Tzedek Akadman, the original Tzemach Tzedek, Kadmon says that by a get, it's two separate things because the get is a get and the ksuba is a financial obligation. But by a heter, by a chen, the whole heter is based on the logic that is mashash ksuba. It's not a separate obligation. It's you're prohibited. We're giving you a way to buy yourself out of the prohibition. So how could you say that separate the two? So that kind of says you can't separate the two. You can't bring a raya from get, where ksuba is its own financial money, to the din of lisay shalishte, where the ksuba is an integral part of this obligation. So Tzemach Tzedek asks him, he says, it's very hard to say that if somebody doesn't have money of ksuba, he will not be able to marry another woman. V'yivatel kol yom of a piri v'rivya. V'yeshev birhure aveda koshem aveda chas v'shalom. And he says that Tzemach Tzedek HaKadmon is talking about a certain scenario where there was a way to sell the ksuba of the woman. And then they would be able to get in such a way that she should be able to get money. So over there, he says, if you're just going to leave her with nothing, when there is a way to sell her ksuba and to generate income from her, in such a case, I'm not letting you get a tomato bomb. I'm not letting you marry another woman. But if it's an area where there's taka no money, then there's nothing you can do. Then you can't say that he should stay like that. The yeshiv kach la'olam, he should just stay the whole life without peri v'rivya. And he says that if medina de gemara, if a person wants to marry a second woman, he doesn't have enough money to give berevach to both of them, he's still allowed to marry them. So Tzemach Tzedek explains like as follows. To say that the Rabbeinu Gershom was machmer more than Dinah de Gemara is impossible to say. The Dinah de Gemara, you don't have to be able to feed them berevach. A little bit is enough also. Tzemach Tzedek, according to Tzemach Tzedek, says Rabbeinu Gershom, you can't say that Rabbeinu Gershom was machmer more than the Dinah de Gemara. Why? First of all, Maram Padve holds a mokem mitzvah legozar. And you don't read 100 rabbis. Yeah. Second thing is, what the Kolbe writes that you need 100 rabbanim is only in the time of the takana. Only when there is the takana is chal, and you want to cancel the takana, then you need 100 rabbis. By nishtatis, or by shasa eser shanim v'lo yolda. According to the Kol Boy, Rabbeinu Gershom's takana never kicked in b'chlal. If the takana never kicked in b'chlal, then you don't need the heter. And especially over here, where you have it Hurei Aveda. Even the third point, even though Mari Mintz holds that Rabbeinu Gershom is goyzer even mokim mitzvah, we already saw what the Veshav HaKoyen explains, which he wrote, that he completely was poirech the shitta of the Mari Mintz. Bechlal, if you want to follow Mari Mintz, the Mari Mintz seems to understand that Yibum is more than Peri V'rivya. Seems like that's a shitta of the Mari Mintz, that by Yibum we could be mater, but by Peri V'rivya is not enough to cancel Chen Rabbeinu Gershom. Tzemach Tzedek says it makes absolutely no sense that Yibum should be more than Peri V'rivya. Why? Simple svara. What's Yibum? L'hakim zera, l'achiv. You're doing piri v'rivya for your brother. Could that be stronger than doing piri v'rivya for yourself? L'hakim zera to yourself? Makes no sense. L'hakim zera for yourself should definitely be more than l'hakim zera l'achiv. So you can't say that Yibum is more than piri v'rivya. More so, there's a halacha that koyfen al piri v'rivya. Kfiyas, or someone to marry or whatever it is, there is such a concept that after a certain age you force people to get married. There's no kfiyah on Yibum. Why? The chiyuv and piri v'rivya is much stronger. Another point, when you're talking about Yibum, on Yibum we're not doiche any mitzvahs asay for Yibum. But on Piri Verivya, it says in Gemara, if you have a Chetzi Evet, Chetzi Ben Chayrin, Koifin is Rabbi L'Shacharoi, so he should be, Chetzi Evet, Chetzi Ben Chayrin is not exactly, we had two owners, one sent him free and one didn't. It's an Isur to be Meshachar Evet, so Oilam B'hem Tavoid, it's mitzvah to say. So we say that because of Piri Verivya, you force the second owner to be Meshachar the Evet, to be over on the mitzvah to say. Why? So the half Evet should become a full Ben Chayrin and should be able to Mekayim Piri Verivya. So he says, even if you want to come and you want to say that Rabbeinu Gershom, that Marim Mintz was talking about Yibum, that Marim Mintz, that Rabbeinu Gershom was Geyser even in Mokim Yibum, you definitely cannot say that even in the place of Piri Verivya. Another raya that Piri Verivya is stronger than Yibum, you know that you sell a Sefer Torah for Piri Verivya, it doesn't say you sell a Sefer Torah for Yibum. So it's clear Piri Verivya is more than Yibum. Then he finishes Piri Verivya. Piri Verivya is discussed in a lot of poskim. That Piri Verivya is a mitzvah, whether Rabbeinu Gershom was Geyser or not. The Tzemach Tzedek takes it one step further. All in ois in the same ois vav. The Tosfos in Gittin that Losheves Yitzara is a mitzvah rabba, is a big mitzvah. It's mentioned a bunch of Tosfos. And there's a certain Tosfos in Chagiga that Losheves Yitzara is even bigger than Piri Verivya. And Tzemach Tzedek concludes Ois Vav, and he says that it's clear to say that even the ones that hold it in Yibum, you have a chiyuv of Piri, you have a chiyuv of Rabbeinu Gershom. You cannot say that the Rabbeinu Gershom would be machmer in the case of Piri Verivya or even in the case of Losheves Yitzara. Completely the opposite of the Marimins. And in the Kitzur Tois Vav, when Tzemach Tzedek summarizes it, he says the same thing. He says, Ef Shaloi Markein, that Rabbeinu Gershom would be machmer if you're not able to be mashach ksuba. The Hashem Rabbeinu Gershom gazar klal mokem mitzvah. Ve'af lo man da'omer de mokem mitzvah sibum gazar im kol zeh neged mitzvahs Piri Verivya velo sheves yitzara, which is it's also a mitzvah. Ve'leishev beloy isha, and the issur that there is for a man to remain single, vadei lo gazar. Right. So now we have an additional layer that was not seen in Kemat in any previous Paisek. Piri Verivya is a mitzvah. Losheves Yitzara is also a mitzvah. Hihurim Roim Kosher Maveda is also enough of a reason to be mafkiach in Rabbeinu Gershom. And also Leishav V'Leish is also enough to be mafkiach in Rabbeinu Gershom. Comes Tzemach Tzedek and continues in Ois Zayin and says, even though, so now he says, maybe we could say that this would only apply, you want to patch all these together, Piri Verivya, Losheves Yitzara, all these things, is only when a person didn't have kids yet. So he wasn't Mekayim Piri Verivya, so now when you want to have a strong Bitul, Chedem Rabbeinu Gershom, you say, Losheves Yitzara, Piri Verivya, put everything together. What happens if somebody talking already has kids? Could you be Mevatel such a thing? So he says in Trumas Hadeshen, he says that the issur of being without a woman, Isur Leishav B'Lai Isha, is stricter than Mitzvahs Yibum. Why? Because if a person, Machmas K'toteh, if there's fights, we say that Yibum gets pushed aside and you do Chalitza. Or if there's fights, we don't say that the Piri Verivya gets pushed aside. And Trumas Hadeshen is brought La'alach in Shulchan Aruch. So therefore, Piri Verivya, again, another eye, Piri Verivya is stronger and stronger than Yibum. Then he goes back into discussion. He says, how can you say that the Bichlal doesn't understand? How can you say that Rabbeinu Gershom Bichlal goes to Mokem Mitzvah? Makes no sense. Aside from the fact that most of the poskim hold that Rabbeinu Gershom Bichlal not goes to Mokem Mitzvah, even those that hold it that Gozer B'Mokem in Mitzvah Yibum, he again repeats the same idea. It's not shaykh to say that there will be Gozer in Piri Verivya and even in Losheves. And more so, he says, today, this whole chedem is over. It's only a minig. Like it says in Shulchan Aruch, in Sif Aleph. And even though this is a strong minig, it's only begeder v'takana. It's not a chedem. And he continues, he says, it's not shaykh. He says, it makes absolutely no sense to say that Rabbeinu Gershom would be machmir for a man to not be able to marry a second wife, when the only reason that he's not able to is because he's unable to afford it, especially when some people are maksha on it. Therefore he says you can't be machmer in such a scenario. It's enough that he takes upon himself his chayvus to pay the ksuba. The only thing is he still has to pay for her mezainis. So it's pretty clear from here that from Tzemach Tzedek's up until now, that if there's a place to be mater chender ben gershom, even if he shouldn't sit without a woman, and prevented hurei aveda, and if it's lachas kam v'kam, if it's l'sheves yitzara, and even more so if it's peri v'rivya, Rabbeinu Gershom was not geyser in any such scenarios, and you could marry, and you could be mater to him. However, still need the meir rabbanim. Right now, there's the next. I'm going to go quickly through the next thing. Since we mentioned it, hurei aveda, the next short shuv in Tzedek Siman Zayin also is talking about a man who didn't get along with his wife, and they separated, and she left for 12 years already. And the husband pretty much told the rabbis, either you let me marry another woman, or I'm going to have to start doing avedas. I can't stay single anymore. And so it goes to discussion. There is a discussion whether you're allowed to be matir to somebody to do something small to prevent in this near the day and Shinam Adalet, whether you could prevent something to do a bigger aveda. And the Tzemach Tzedek says, L'chayra, Rabbeinu Gershom has a bigger problem. Why? Because what's going to happen? We have a pirza. Every person who wants to get rid of his wife is not interested in working it out in a normal way. So they come to the rabbis and tell them, you don't let me marry another woman, I'm going to go sin. Do something really bad. And the whole Chayim Rabbeinu Gershom is cancelled. You can't come and say such clear as, hey, a guy shows up, says, you let me, or I'm going to do an aveda, and then goodbye. You let him. He says, it's not shaykh to say this. He says, Elamai, over here, it all boils down to the common sense of the rabbi. Here, they're separated for such a long time. Then, if you want to compare it to a scenario, you would compare it to a scenario of, everybody knows what's the chatay b'shech yishke chaveircha, is when a person puts bread into the oven, and could somebody else take it out? So the person shouldn't do an aveda, yeah? So if the person himself who puts it in the oven wants to knock it off before it completely bakes, yeah, then it's not such a big problem. It's not yichte chaveircha. It's you'll do a smaller one. You'll do a smaller aveda to be able to prevent from doing a big aveda. It's not such a big problem. It's also, but still. And in such a scenario, it's better, he compares it's better to say that the person, if you have a case where a person has in front of him, you tell a person better he should eat geschachtene behemoths than to eat nevelas. Yeah, a little bit less of an isser. And he brings, for example, there's a thing of it's better for a person to marry a woman that might not be so mutter to him, rather than he should be with her without marriage while she's in Iddah. So he says, Bichlal, the fact that she separated from him for more than 12 months makes her a meiredes. So if she's a meiredes, it's already enough of a reason, according to certain scenarios, to be that Rabbeinu Gershom was not matter. So just because of him saying I'm going to do avedas, it's not enough of a reason. But you combine it together with meiredes, that she was gone for so many years, more than 12 months. This is 12 years, but more than 12 months. That's already enough of a thing. And he says, and more so, he says when a person comes. This is a Marik who says that when a person says, I'm going to go be Oved Avodah Zareh, he says a few times, I'm going to be Oved Avodah Zareh, he already becomes a shtikl mummer towards it. So he says, in such a scenario, when taka we see that they're separated for so long, if a person says it, this is not going to open up a free market for everyone. This is a real scenario. 12 years separate, 12 years she disappeared, and she's not coming back. So in such a scenario, you could be matir in such a scenario. Okay, we're running out of time. We do have a few more things. Probably tomorrow. Tomorrow I will be mashlamit, or maybe I'll be mashlamit towards the end of the week. Maybe Wednesday we'll try to be mashlamit. That way there'll be enough time for you to catch up on what we did. So we covered most of what I wanted to cover today.